Hi, Resilient Inuk here. I decided that 2023 is going to be about me. For so long now, I've been advocating for my missing sister, Pam. I haven't had the opportunity to share my story with you. So I'm going to start doing that as hard as it might be. But I think it's important to share this so that we could create change and also to give strength to our youth. I was able to get my children's aid records and police records to try to piece together my childhood as it was very traumatizing. I have all the documents here ready to go, and it's been very hard for me to open these because it brings back a lot of memories. But I've done a lot of therapy, and I think it's important in order to create change and understand what Indigenous women go through. I started my healing journey in 2017. That's not too long ago. I really focused on being a mom for all those years. That was my number one goal. Ensure my children weren't in the foster care system, ensure that they had the most, normal lives, being Indigenous boys. However, it was only in 2017 that I actually started truly healing who I am and discovering my truths. And I think it's important to know that I'm just like you. I'm not, superwoman or I didn't grow up with privilege. And look at where I'm at. So I think that's important to show and also to try to make change. So I'm going to expose myself. And in doing so, um, I think it's also going to be very healing for me for the world to know who I truly am. So in 2017, I met with a doctor from Toronto that came to Timmins, where I was living. And she came for just preparement of the national inquiry for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two Spirit. And her name was Dr. Smiley. She's actually the first person that actually made me feel like they cared. And I opened up to her and shared with her just briefly on all the traumas that I went through in the short period of time that I knew her when she was in Timmins. She offered me virtual therapy and I took it. And I'll never forget how hard it was. At the beginning, I would make excuses to cancel. I wouldn't want to be there. I would try to, not talk about the real issues, but eventually, you just have to talk about them. Because of my therapy and putting this together, I felt like, does she believe me? Does my therapist believe me? Not that she did anything wrong. It's just something that you think, okay, I said all this. Now, do you believe me? Because it's a lot. And so I requested my files. I ended up getting my files. It took me a couple of years through a lawyer, and that's a whole nother process. Half of them, or more than half, are blacked out. However, I still got a really good grasp because I've lived through it, of what I don't remember because of trauma. I think the one thing that was most validating for me was when I got my files and I compared it to my therapy narrative sessions, they matched. I felt grateful that I had these records to prove what I was saying was true. So once I had my documents, I filed a human rights complaint against a police force and also a children's aid office. My human rights complaint is still waiting to see what happens. But I didn't really know. I honestly didn't even know that the extent of my foster care. I obviously knew I was in foster care. I obviously knew I had probably about 5, 6, 7 different homes. But I didn't know the extent that, I was society ward and how far it went and that, with the courts and stuff. So it really blew my mind when I read it. And there's a lot of shocking things. So I'm really looking forward to going through my narrative with you all. I truly hope this inspires others to start their healing journeys and find their truth. So when I got my children's aid records, I was shocked. I didn't know there was 1,200 pages, and I didn't think that that many pages would be blacked right out. I probably have 70% of my pages are blacked right out. And my lawyer is still fighting that today to know what my truth is. Why are you hiding my truth? Hopefully I get answers. Hopefully I have a right to see. Everybody that's in my file, my mother, my stepfather, and my sister are all moved on to the spirit world, or my sister's missing at the least. So I should be able to have access to what's inside my file. I'll never forget the first thing that shocked me was seeing how young I was when I first was abused. I was 2 months old. My mother told the Children's Aid that my stepfather abused me at the age of 2 months old. That's when it began. And I was abused physically until I was about 10 or 11 years old. This was with the belt, with objects, with his hand, things like that. And I didn't see it then, but my mother was in a domestic violent relationship, and it wasn't safe for any of us in that home. One thing I want to be sure that I'm clear on is that throughout this, you're going to realize how imperfect my mother is, how much anger and hurt she caused me. However, we need to realize that her father was placed in a sanatorium at 19 years old and didn't have a family. Her mother abandoned her, and she was raised by a Cree woman who attended residential school. So my mom didn't have the knowledge to be a good mom all the time. That's not to say she was never. My mom didn't know how to protect us. I hope you're going to follow me on this journey. We're going to go through my files. We're going to go through my narrative and just tell you my life story from the time, till now, and to show you who I really am, and to hopefully have people realize what changes need to be made so that this doesn't happen over and over. So, Nakamik, for being here with me. I appreciate you so much, and I'm looking forward to sharing this journey in 2023. Seeing how young I was when I first was abused. I was 2 months old. I couldn't believe what I was reading. What kind of monster beats a 2-month-old? The first time I was placed in foster care, I was only 4 years old and my sister was 2. We lived in an upstairs apartment, and a lady downstairs had called the police at 10:30 at night to report that they heard children crying upstairs. When the Timmins police arrived, they found nobody at the home except me and my sister, and we were locked inside our bedroom from the outside. I briefly remember bits and pieces of this incident. I remember the officer taking me to the bathroom because I had to go pee. And I remember her seeing all the bruises on my body. My Children's Aid's records show that my stepfather took a piece of the bunk bed ladder that was made out of hardwood and beat us with it. My records also show that I told the police that my stepfather was hitting me. I remember being examined and x-rayed. I remember being placed in a foster home. The reason he beat us was because my mother didn't come home on time. My records also show that my family was under severe financial stress, and that my stepfather often blamed his anger on that. My records indicate that they were going to charge my stepfather for common assault. I'm not sure if that happened. It was also very clear in my records that I was Indigenous. My sister and I then became society wardship. My first foster home would only last 8 days until I was moved again to another home. And that home would only last 1 day, where I'd be moved again. And 4 days later, moved again. That's 4 foster homes in less than 2 weeks. My records also show that when my parents came to visit me and my sister, they were very upset that my stepfather was being charged with assault and didn't pay any interest in us. My notes also say that my mother acted very sheepish around my stepfather. They knew there was domestic violence. A couple of months later, my sister and I would be returned home on a supervision order. And during that supervision order, the notes indicate that my stepfather would use corporal punishment on my sister and I still. The children's aid worker would leave pamphlets for my stepfather to try to control his anger. The supervision order would be extended due to the fact that my mother left my stepfather and took us to another home for a night. My mother, who would have been only 17 or 18 years old, was feeling stressed on parenting. The home visits from the Children's Aid eventually stopped, and the supervision order was terminated about a year later, even though the abuse continued. The next incident in my records show that I was only 7 years old and my sister was 5, and it has to do with our babysitter, which is my stepfather's nephew. My records indicate that Children's Aid received a phone call of an alleged abuse. The perpetrator was caught in front of a female. They quickly figured out that I was that female and that my perpetrator confessed to what he did to me. My records show that both my sister and I disclosed that this person had played the peanut game with us. They used dolls for me and my sister to show how we were violated. My records also show how he on us. I remember multiple incidents with this young man. I also remember him threatening to kill me if I was to tell my parents. My records show that I disclosed that this actually happened as well a year before, and nothing was done. It also talks about the pain I went through physically when he put his inside me. I will never forget that feeling of being outside my body watching this happen to me. I also remember being at the doctor's and being examined on the table. My records show that this only happened twice. However, I know different. It happened multiple times. What I found really gross that's in my records, it states, prior to this disclosure, the children felt guilty for what happened as they did nothing to stop it, partly because of their curiosity. Remember, I was 7 and my sister was 5. What's really disturbing is the part the Timmins police played in this. They were notified of the abuse, and they told the Children's Aid that they do not intend to lay charges because of the age and the fact that he was remorseful. Another thing that I found in my records that was disturbing is that the Children's Aid worker indicated that there was no signs of traumatization and that we could tell someone if someone does wrong to us now. It also indicates that our relationship with our parents wasn't affected. What's really mind-blowing is that my parents demonstrated an attitude of acceptance and forgiveness with respect to the alleged abuser. This attitude seems to have been adopted by the children. I think it's also important for people to know that my parents were practicing Pentecostal religion. My records show that religion plays a significant role and is a definite family strength. What kind of parents forgive somebody abusing their 2 children? And it gets even worse. This person never babysits me again, but they move in with us and is part of our family from the time I was about 9 years old till 11. Imagine having to live with your abuser, one that physically abuses you and one that abuses you. Today, I'm fighting this pedophile in court. He thinks what he did was okay because of his age. He claims that I have mental health issues. He claims that I mistaken him for somebody else. He claims that I consented. He was responsible for my care. He was 14 years old. How many 14-year-olds you know that go around abusing 5 and 7-year-olds?